Fey hours. 1,800 Japanese soldiers were advancing through the rubber plantation toward my position. I was holding a Fey caliber machine gun with exactly 47 rounds remaining. My name was Technical Sergeant Joseph Martinez, and according to my service record, I was nothing but a mess sergeant assigned to the Faith Tank Battalion. The Army had trained me to prepare rations and manage supply inventories. They had not trained me to hold a defensive position against an entire Japanese regiment. But Bataan Peninsula doesn't care what your military specialty says. Records show that by April, Fey American forces in the Philippines had been fighting without resupply for 4 months. Our tank battalion had lost 16 of its 21 M. Stewart light tanks. The surviving crews had been reassigned to infantry positions. Along the final defense line, I had been ordered to establish a field kitchen 200 yards behind the front lines. Standard procedure called for mess personnel to remain in rear areas away from direct combat. That protocol assumed the front lines would hold. Can you picture the chaos? 76,000 American and Filipino defenders compressed into a shrinking perimeter. Ammunition running critically low, no air support, no naval evacuation possible. The humidity was crushing. Fey degrees with near complete saturation, uniforms rotted on men's backs, equipment rusted within days. Malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever killed more soldiers than Japanese bullets. Food supplies had been cut to quarter rations 3 weeks ago. Most men had lost 30 pounds since December. Japanese forces had spent 3 months systematically reducing our positions. They knew exactly where we were weak. Their intelligence was precise, methodical, devastating. They had maps showing every American foxhole, every supply depot, every defensive strongpoint. They knew our ammunition levels, our food reserves, our casualty rates. They knew we were finished. I was heating morning coffee when the barrage started. The coffee pot held exactly 4 gallons, enough for 60 men if rationed properly. We had been rationing everything for weeks. Coffee, condensed milk, sugar, ammunition, hope. I was stirring powdered eggs into the pot when the first shell screamed overhead. The sound was unmistakable. Incoming artillery. Japanese artillery opened fire at Fey hours. Archive reports indicate they fired over 2,000 rounds in the opening bombardment. The sound was beyond description. Metal screaming through air, earth erupting, the concussive waves that make your organs vibrate inside your chest. The first shell landed 60 yards to my left. I watched a coconut palm tree disappear in a column of black smoke and flying debris. The second shell landed 40 yards to my right. They were bracketing my position, adjusting fire with mathematical precision. I had exactly 12 seconds to find cover before they split the difference. My field kitchen disappeared in the third salvo. One moment I was standing beside a portable stove, stirring powdered eggs in a metal pot. The next moment, I was lying in a crater covered in dirt, tasting blood. The blast had lifted me completely off the ground and thrown me 15 feet backward. My ears were ringing so loudly I could not hear my own voice. The explosion had been close enough that I felt the heat on my face, close enough that shrapnel whistled past my head, but I could see the destruction around me. The field stove was twisted metal scattered across 20 yards. The food supplies I had been preparing for breakfast were burning fragments mixed with jungle soil. Canned peaches, powdered milk, hardtack biscuits, all transformed into smoking debris. 200 gallons of fresh water, more precious than ammunition in this climate, had been scattered into the mud by a single artillery shell. The Japanese had calculated this assault precisely. Intelligence captured after the war revealed their battle plan: concentrate overwhelming firepower on a narrow sector, break through the American line, roll up defensive positions from the flank. Their artillery observers had been watching our positions for days, mapping every foxhole, every supply point, every defensive strong point. What they could not calculate was human unpredictability under impossible circumstances. I crawled through the smoke toward what remained of the American defense line. Fragments of voices reached me through the din of exploding shells. Someone was calling for a medic. Someone else was calling for more ammunition. The voices were getting fainter, moving away from me. Our soldiers were falling back under the bombardment, abandoning positions that could no longer be held. Standard defensive doctrine under overwhelming artillery fire. Withdraw to predetermined secondary positions, regroup, continue resistance from cover. But there were no secondary positions. This was the final line. After action accounts, note that the artillery barrage lifted at Fay hours. 5 minutes later, Japanese infantry emerged from the rubber trees. I could see them through the smoke, organized formations moving with professional discipline. They advanced in 3 waves, each wave approximately 200 yards behind the previous one. The first wave carried rifles and light machine guns, men moving in disciplined bounds, 2 soldiers advancing while 8 soldiers covered them, then the roles reversing, professional infantry tactics executed with textbook precision. The second wave carried Bangalore torpedoes and satchel charges to destroy defensive positions. These were the specialists, the men trained to neutralize American foxholes and bunkers that survived the artillery bombardment. They moved more slowly than the first wave, staying low, using cover effectively, waiting for the lead elements to suppress any remaining American resistance. The third wave carried ammunition and medical supplies to sustain the assault. These soldiers moved at a steady pace, not rushing, not taking unnecessary risks. They understood that this was a marathon, not a sprint. The Japanese commander intended to maintain pressure on American positions for hours, possibly days, until all resistance collapsed. Our front-line positions were supposed to hold them. Supposed to. But 30 minutes after the attack began, I could hear American soldiers falling back through the jungle behind me. Voices calling for ammunition, voices calling for medics, voices that were getting closer to my position every minute. The defense was collapsing. Can you imagine lying in a crater surrounded by the debris of your destroyed kitchen, watching enemy soldiers advance toward you through the smoke while your own army retreats? The mathematical reality was inescapable. I was one man with no combat training, armed with cooking utensils and kitchen knives, facing a professional infantry assault. Every tactical manual in existence said I should retreat immediately, fall back with the other survivors, live to fight another day. Do you see the problem? I was trained to feed soldiers, not fight them. My combat experience consisted of 2 weeks of basic rifle training 18 months ago. I had never fired the Fay caliber machine gun that someone had abandoned in the foxhole beside my destroyed kitchen. I had never called artillery fire. I had never faced enemy infantry advancing toward my position with the intention of killing me. But something else was happening that changed the tactical equation. 20 yards away, partially hidden in another crater, I could see an American soldier, a kid, maybe 19 years old, wounded in the leg, unable to move. Blood had soaked through his field dressing and was pooling in the muddy water at the bottom of his shell hole. He was conscious, watching me, waiting to see what I would do. His rifle lay beside him, bolt open, magazine empty. Behind him, maybe 50 yards through the jungle, I could hear more voices, American voices, wounded soldiers who had been left behind when their units withdrew, men who could not retreat, men who were counting on someone, anyone, to buy them time. One voice kept calling for a corpsman. Another was reciting the Lord's Prayer in a steady whisper. These were the men the Japanese would find if I abandoned my position. Standard doctrine specified immediate withdrawal for support personnel when front-line positions became untenable. Fall back to predetermined rally points. Regroup with surviving units. Continue resistance from prepared secondary positions. But there were no secondary positions. This was the final line. Behind me lay Marvels, the last American stronghold in the Philippines, where 20,000 wounded and sick soldiers waited for evacuation that would never come. I crawled toward the abandoned machine gun. The weapon was a .30 caliber Browning, water-cooled, fed by fabric ammunition belts. Someone had left it in a foxhole with 3 belts of ammunition and a field manual. The previous operator had been hit by shrapnel. Blood stained the receiver where he had been lying. His dog tags were still hanging on the tripod mount. The manual was written in technical language I barely understood. Rate of fire 400 to 600 rounds per minute. Effective range 1,000 yards. Maximum range 3,500 yards. Water jacket capacity 1 quart. The cooling system required constant water circulation to prevent barrel overheating during sustained fire. None of those numbers meant anything to me. I had never operated automatic weapons. I did not understand ballistics or trajectory calculation or sustained fire doctrine. But I understood desperation, and that was about to become my most important qualification. The first Japanese soldiers appeared 150 yards away, a squad of 8 men moving carefully through the plantation, rifles ready, advancing by bounds. 2 men moving while 6 men covered them. Professional infantry tactics. Their uniforms were different from what I had expected. Dark brown cotton, not the light khaki I had seen in training films. They wore soft caps instead of helmets, and their equipment was minimal: rifle, bayonet, ammunition pouches, water canteen. They moved without wasted motion, each step calculated. The lead soldier carried a Type 99 rifle with a distinctive curved bolt handle. The squad leader had binoculars hanging from his neck and was studying my position carefully. They had spotted the foxhole where I was hiding. They knew someone was there. I could see them pointing in my direction, gesturing to each other, planning their approach. The squad leader raised his hand and the entire squad stopped moving. 8 soldiers, perfectly still, watching my position. One soldier raised his rifle and fired a single shot. The bullet struck the earth 2 feet to my left. They were testing for response, trying to determine if the position was occupied. Witnesses who survived the battle recalled what happened next. I did something that violated every principle of military common sense. Instead of retreating, instead of hiding, instead of surrendering, I opened fire with the abandoned machine gun. Not careful, aimed shots. Not controlled bursts designed to conserve ammunition. Maximum rate of fire directly into the advancing squad. The gun bucked against my shoulder with every round. Hot brass cascaded around the foxhole like metallic rain. Each cartridge case was still warm when it hit the ground. Tracers streaked through the jungle air, bright orange lines connecting my position to theirs. I had no idea how to properly fire the weapon. The water jacket was already getting hot. I could feel the heat through my gloves. No understanding of its effective range, its rate of fire, its ammunition capacity. The manual said something about sustained fire causing barrel overheating, but I did not understand what that meant. Water was supposed to circulate through the cooling jacket, but I could not tell if the system was working properly. I simply held the trigger down and hoped for the best. Pure desperation masquerading as tactical action. The sound was overwhelming. Each round fired produced a sharp crack, followed by the mechanical cycling of the bolt. The weapon had been manufactured in 1918, 24 years ago, but the mechanism still functioned with clockwork precision. Multiply that by 600 rounds per minute, and the result is constant thunder. The water in the cooling jacket was beginning to boil. I could hear it bubbling inside the metal sleeve surrounding the barrel. I could not hear enemy gunfire, could not hear voices shouting orders, could not hear anything except the mechanical roar of automatic fire and the brass cartridges hitting the ground around my feet. Each spent case was stamped with US and the manufacturing date. Some were from 1940, others from 1941. All that remained of American industrial capacity delivered to this jungle foxhole. 3 Japanese soldiers fell immediately. I watched them drop through the drifting smoke. The soldier on the left spun around and collapsed against a rubber tree. The center soldier simply crumpled where he stood. The soldier on the right stumbled backward several steps before falling. The remaining 5 dove for cover behind rubber trees, their perfect tactical advance suddenly disrupted. Their advance stopped. For perhaps 30 seconds, the plantation was silent, except for the sound of my own breathing and the mechanical clicking of the machine gun cooling down. Then I heard voices, Japanese voices, calm, professional, analyzing the situation. Someone was calling for a medic. Someone else was reporting casualties to higher command. They were adapting to unexpected resistance with military efficiency. They were calling for support. More soldiers, heavy weapons, flanking movements to neutralize the machine gun position. Standard response to unexpected resistance. But they were also doing something else. They were hesitating. One machine gun, properly positioned, could inflict devastating casualties on attacking infantry. They needed to determine how many Americans were defending this position before committing additional forces. The Japanese squad leader was making calculations. How many crew members operated the weapon? Were there other positions providing supporting fire? Was this an isolated strong point or part of a coordinated defense? These questions could not be answered by observation alone. The smoke and jungle vegetation obscured his view. He could see muzzle flashes, but not the size of the defending force. I reloaded with hands that would not stop shaking. My fingers were numb from gripping the gun handles. The ammunition belt felt impossibly heavy. Each round represented life or death, mine and theirs. According to the field manual, each belt contained 250 rounds. I had fired perhaps 100 rounds in the initial engagement. The barrel was already too hot to touch. Steam was rising from the water jacket. That left approximately 90 rounds in the current belt, plus 2 additional belts. Perhaps 600 rounds total against 1,800 enemy soldiers. That was essentially nothing. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even if every round found its target, even if I achieved impossible accuracy, I could eliminate less than half of 1% of the attacking force. Unless I could make them believe it was something more. Reports from captured Japanese documents indicate their regimental commander received word of the machine gun position at 0355 hours. The report stated that American forces had established a strong defensive position with interlocking fields of fire. The Japanese commander ordered a company-sized assault to neutralize the threat. 120 soldiers against one cook with a machine gun. He did not know how to operate. The mathematics were simple. 120 soldiers advancing from multiple directions against a single defensive position. Even with automatic weapons, even with perfect fields of fire, the position would be overrun within minutes. Japanese small unit tactics emphasized coordinated assault, overwhelming local superiority, accepting casualties to achieve objectives quickly. They had executed these tactics successfully throughout the Philippines campaign. What came next demonstrates the fundamental psychology of warfare under extreme stress. Training matters, experience matters, equipment matters. But sometimes, pure stubbornness matters more than all of them combined. The company attack began at 0410 hours. Japanese soldiers advanced from 3 directions simultaneously. Direct frontal assault, supported by flanking movements from left and right. Classic small unit tactics designed to overwhelm a fixed position. I could see roughly 40 soldiers in the center formation, moving through the rubber trees in disciplined bounds, 2 soldiers advancing while the remainder provided covering fire. Then those 2 soldiers taking cover and providing fire while the next pair advanced. Professional soldiers executing a textbook assault. They moved with mechanical precision, no wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. Each soldier understood his role in the coordinated attack. The flanking forces moved more slowly, using terrain features for cover, working to position themselves for enfilade fire once they reached effective range. The entire operation demonstrated months of training and combat experience. I opened fire at 100 yards. The range was clearly marked by a destroyed Filipino ammunition cart, halfway between my position and the advancing soldiers. Too far for accurate shooting with a machine gun, I did not understand. The weapon pulled up and to the right with each burst. I had no idea how to compensate for muzzle climb. Most of my rounds missed, striking rubber trees or disappearing into the jungle behind the advancing soldiers. I could see bark exploding where bullets hit, leaves and branches falling like rain. But some connected. 2 soldiers fell in the first burst. The formation scattered, seeking cover. Individual soldiers diving behind trees, disrupting their coordinated advance. Their attack momentum broke. The textbook formation dissolved into chaos. Here is what I learned in that moment. Combat effectiveness is not always about hitting your target. Sometimes it is about making your enemy believe you might hit them. Fear is a weapon as powerful as bullets. Uncertainty is a force multiplier that costs nothing but courage. The Japanese soldiers had observed automatic fire from a fixed position. They had witnessed casualties among their advancing elements. They had to assume they were facing trained machine gun crews operating from prepared defensive positions. The Japanese formations regrouped and tried again. This time they advanced more carefully, using cover more effectively, advancing in smaller groups to minimize exposure. But I had learned something too. I had discovered that the machine gun could traverse left and right, that I could shift fire from target to target, that I could force multiple formations to take cover simultaneously, simply by firing in their direction. Do you understand the psychological dynamics at work? The Japanese soldiers could see muzzle flashes. They could hear sustained automatic fire. They could observe the tactical effects of suppressive fire on their formations. But they could not see how many Americans were operating the weapon. In their minds, one machine gun suggested a defended position with multiple crew members, possibly multiple weapons, possibly a coordinated defense. The second assault failed when I concentrated fire on their left flanking movement. I had noticed the soldiers moving through the trees, trying to position themselves for enfilade fire. When they were 50 yards from an effective firing position, I traversed the machine gun to their location and fired a long burst directly into their concealed positions. Whether I hit anyone or not was irrelevant. The flanking movement stopped. The soldiers took cover and waited for orders. At 0425 hours, the Japanese commander ordered artillery support. Mortar teams began firing on my position. The first rounds landed 30 yards short. I could hear the distinctive sound of mortars firing, a dull thump followed by the whistle of shells in flight. Then the explosions, each one closer than the last. They were walking their fire toward the foxhole methodically, professionally. In another minute, the shells would land directly on my position. Standard response: abandon the position, move to alternate firing location, continue resistance from cover. But there was no alternate position. Behind me was open ground leading to Marival's. If I left the foxhole, if I stopped firing, the Japanese advance would resume immediately. They would overrun the American positions within minutes. 20,000 sick and wounded soldiers would be captured or killed. I made a decision that violated every tactical principle I had been taught. I called fire down on my own position. Not artillery. I had no radio, no contact with American gun positions. I called machine gun fire down on my own position. I opened fire at point-blank range on the advancing Japanese formations, even though they were close enough that their return fire could kill me easily. The mortar rounds were landing 10 yards away now. Each explosion threw dirt and shrapnel into the air. I could feel fragments hitting the edge of the foxhole, metal pieces no bigger than coins but moving fast enough to kill. The concussion waves made my chest feel compressed. My lungs struggled to expand between explosions. But the Japanese infantry was using the mortar fire as cover for their advance. They were moving forward while I was forced to keep my head down. Standard infantry, artillery coordination, advance under covering fire, assault when the barrage lifts, overrun the position before the defenders can recover. In another 30 seconds they would be close enough for rifle fire to be devastatingly effective. Close enough that grenades would be practical. Close enough that individual marksmanship would determine the outcome. I raised my head above the edge of the foxhole and opened fire. Japanese soldiers were 15 yards away, moving toward my position. I could see their faces clearly, young men determined, professional. They were shouting orders to each other, coordinating their assault. When they saw the machine gun rise above the foxhole rim, several of them dropped to one knee and opened fire with their rifles. Bullets cracked past my head. One round struck the edge of the foxhole and threw dirt into my face. Another round hit the machine gun receiver and ricocheted with a metallic ping. But I kept firing. Target burst. Target burst. Mechanical precision. No fear, no hesitation. Another Japanese soldier fell, then another. The advancing formation broke up, soldiers seeking individual cover rather than maintaining coordinated assault formation. Witnesses recalled the sound, constant firing, magazines being changed, hot metal cooling, voices shouting in 2 languages. The plantation filled with smoke. Visibility dropped to 10 yards. Nobody could see clearly what was happening. The battle became a confusion of sound and muzzle flashes and movements through the rubber trees. But something else was happening too. The Japanese advance had stalled. Not stopped. Stalled. Their regimental commander was receiving reports of heavy resistance from multiple positions. His company assault had been repelled twice. His casualties were mounting. Intelligence suggested the Americans had established a stronger defensive line than expected. The commander made a tactical decision that saved my life. Though I did not know it at the time, he ordered his regiment to bypass the machine gun position and continue the main advance along a different axis. Leave one company to contain the Americans at this location and prevent them from interfering with the primary assault. Neutralize them later with heavy weapons. What this meant, in practical terms, was that 120 Japanese soldiers were now committed to destroying one cook with 47 rounds remaining. But it also meant that 1,700 Japanese soldiers were no longer attacking Marivolas directly. They had been diverted, delayed, forced to modify their assault plan because of unexpected resistance. This is the moment when everything changed. Not because I became a better soldier, not because the Japanese became worse soldiers, but because the tactical situation shifted from pure combat to psychological warfare. I had perhaps 20 rounds left when the Japanese company commander decided to end the engagement quickly. He ordered a final assault, all remaining soldiers attacking simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming firepower, except casualties to eliminate the position definitively. Standard solution to a tactical problem that was costing too much time and too many men. They came from everywhere at once, through the rubber trees, through the smoke, shouting, firing, moving fast to close the distance before I could bring effective fire to bear. Japanese voices echoed through the plantation. Banzai came from the left. Teki da from the right, enemy contact. They had identified my position and were converging from 3 directions simultaneously. I could see faces. Young men determined, professional, sweat staining their uniforms despite the morning coolness. One soldier was bleeding from a shoulder wound but still advancing. Another had lost his helmet but maintained perfect firing posture. They were 20 yards away when I opened fire one last time. The distance was so close I could see individual details, torn fabric, mud stains, the intense focus in their eyes as they prepared to overrun my position. The gun fired 8 rounds before the ammunition belt ran out. 8 rounds against 40 advancing soldiers. Then, nothing. Mechanical silence. The clicking of the bolt on an empty chamber. I was defenseless. But something extraordinary happened. The Japanese assault faltered, not because of my fire. 8 rounds could not stop 40 soldiers, but because after 2 hours of sustained resistance, after multiple failed attacks, after unexpected casualties, the attacking forces had developed a psychological expectation of lethal resistance from this position. When the gun went silent, they expected it to be reloading, not empty. They expected continued fire, not surrender. He understood what was happening in that moment. The silence was working in my favor. I began moving the machine gun barrel left and right, tracking individual soldiers as if preparing to fire. The motion was visible through the smoke. Japanese soldiers could see the weapon traversing, could see the muzzle pointed directly at their positions. Several soldiers called warnings to their comrades. Others shifted positions to avoid being targeted. The phantom threat was as effective as actual ammunition. The Japanese soldiers took cover and waited for the firing to resume. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Still silence. I could hear them talking to each other across the plantation. Orders being given, positions being coordinated. Someone was calling for reinforcements. Someone else was requesting permission to advance. But they were hesitating. The silence had become more threatening than the gunfire. It suggested reloading, repositioning, preparation for more devastating fire. But by then, other American positions had heard the sustained firing. Artillery observers at Firebase Charlie had plotted the coordinates. They had seen the Japanese regiment redirecting its assault. They had called for reinforcement, artillery support. Airstrikes were en route from Australia. P-40 Warhawks carrying 500-pound bombs and .50 caliber machine guns. The tactical situation was shifting in ways that neither I nor the Japanese company commander could fully understand. After-action reports indicate that Japanese forces captured my position at 0445 hours. They found 1 American soldier, 1 machine gun, and approximately 200 empty cartridge cases scattered around a single foxhole. The brass formed a perfect circle around the gun position, evidence of sustained automatic fire from a fixed location. The Japanese company commander counted his losses: 14 killed, 3 wounded, against 1 defender. The casualty ratio was 37-1. The Japanese company commander reported that he had neutralized a reinforced American defensive position after sustained combat operations. His report recommended that future assaults against similar positions should employ tank support and preliminary artillery bombardment lasting at least 30 minutes. He was not incorrect. 1 position had been neutralized, but the cost was tactical delay, casualty losses, and redirection of an entire regiment at a critical moment in the assault. The Japanese breakthrough at Marives was postponed by 6 hours. That postponement allowed American forces to establish defensive positions that held for an additional 18 days. Archive documents captured after the war reveal the broader impact. Japanese military analysts studied the engagement as an example of American defensive tactics under extreme conditions. They concluded that American soldiers would fight from fixed positions with unexpected tenacity, even when outnumbered and under-equipped. This conclusion influenced their planning for subsequent operations throughout the Pacific Theater. The engagement also influenced American tactical doctrine. Military analysts recognized that individual soldiers in desperate circumstances could achieve effects far beyond their apparent capabilities, not through superior training or equipment, but through willingness to accept impossible odds rather than surrender. This principle became fundamental to American defensive strategy during the island-hopping campaigns that followed, but the most significant impact was psychological. Both armies learned that combat effectiveness cannot be measured purely by firepower ratios or troop strength comparisons. Human factors, fear, uncertainty, determination, desperation, create tactical effects that defy mathematical prediction. One cook with a machine gun he barely knew how to operate had delayed an entire regiment because neither side could calculate the courage of desperate men. The battle for Bataan ended on the 9th of April, 1942. American